Okay, it looks like we've hit noon, so why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Dave Striffling. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Chicago Water Week event, Selling Water to Joliet, Chicago, and the Great Lakes Compact. I'm a professor here at Marquette Law School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just off the shores of Lake Michigan. I'm also the director of our Water Law and Policy Initiative. The Water Law and Policy Initiative is associated with our Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. And so I'm coming to you live today from our virtual Lubar Center. Also, want to thank Current, with whom this event is affiliated. Thank them for sponsoring Chicago Water Week. We're very excited to join as a participant again this year. I believe this is the third time over the years that we've had a Chicago Water Week event, and we're really excited to do so again this year. I also really want to thank all of you as part of the audience for coming today. We've had a great level of interest in this event. I think it speaks to the interest in the subject matter of the agreement between Chicago and Joliet. And we've got folks from various levels of state, local, and federal government, state and local and or state and federal agencies, water providers, planning agencies, a whole scope of different folks. And I know there are a variety of perspectives on this topic and a lot of passion about it. And just at the outset, I want to say I don't mean to express any value judgments or any other sort of plus or minus on this topic. Our purpose here today is just to convene and inform. So with that, and without further ado, let's get started. I do want to say just a few words about the Water Law and Policy Initiative, as I always do at the beginning of our events. There are a variety of things that we do. Obviously, first priority for us is our students here at the law school. And so we have a variety of classes and internships and research opportunities that they do, including with the legal departments of some of our participants in the audience here today. So we thank you for that. And if you have a law department and you're looking to hire law students, I'd love to hear from you. We do research of a variety of different types, some grant funded, some independent. We collaborate with others, both inside and outside the university, who have a similar interest in water resources. And we do a variety of public events like this one. Many of them are in person, some are virtual, but all are free and open to the public. So really happy to be associated with Chicago Water Week again this year. And part of the reason for that is we have had a longstanding interest here at the law school in what we call the Chicago megacity, because the name, the Milwaukee megacity, did not stick. So the Chicago megacity, of course, stretches along Lake Michigan in the tri-state area from north of Milwaukee down through Chicago to northwest Indiana. And we've done a variety of conferences and events on the subject of the Chicago megacity, all the way back almost a decade and a half now to 2012, Milwaukee's future in the Chicago megacity. And then we've also done a couple of water-related events related to the megacity, Lake Michigan and the Chicago megacity in 2018, and water policy in the Chicago megacity in 2021. That was our first Chicago Water Week event. As I said, I think this is our third. And so we're really happy to bring these threads together. The Chicago megacity, the Chicago Water Week, and the Great Lakes Compact, which has been, of course, another subject of significant interest to us here at Marquette in the law school. We're also happy to be one of the partner organizations working with Current on the new NSF-supported Regional Innovation Engine, working towards the blue economy. So we're very grateful for Current's leadership on that and excited to be, as I said, one of the partner institutions. So all the more reason for us to be part of Chicago Water Week. Okay, so we're here to talk today about the Great Lakes, obviously, and the Great Lakes Compact. And I know that many of you are very familiar with the Great Lakes. It's quite an intimidating audience in some ways, the depth of your knowledge and passion about this subject, but I'll do my best. And I think even for those of us who live in the region, it can be difficult to realize the vast scope and scale of the Great Lakes, or to forget about it, frankly. So it's worth going through some of the basic background figures. Together, the five Great Lakes contain about 6 quadrillion gallons of fresh water. As it's often said, enough to submerge the continental U.S. in about 10 feet of water. It's the largest system of surface freshwater in the world, containing 90% of North America's freshwater and 20% of the world's freshwater. But I think a lesser known statistic is that it only provides drinking water to about 10% of the US population. And one of the questions I think for us to think about is whether that's an appropriate thing. Certainly, that's what the Great Lakes Compact is designed to do, to limit the usage of the Great Lakes water to the Great Lakes Basin with limited exceptions. But there certainly are those who regard the Great Lakes as certainly a water destination and a potential source of water for areas far outside the Great Lakes Basin. And so it's worth considering and thinking about that as we go through this topic today. 94,000 square miles of surface area, 11,000 miles of shoreline, parts of 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces. One thing I want to note as we look at this image, though, of the Great Lakes Basin is that the only state that's completely within the basin is Michigan, and in parts of the other states, including my state of Wisconsin, the basin is actually fairly narrow. Certainly that's true in Illinois and Indiana as well, and Pennsylvania. So it's many portions of the Great Lakes states are actually outside the Great Lakes Basin, and that's something else that I want us to keep in mind as we go forward today. The Great Lakes, obviously, not just about economics and usage of the lakes, also about scenic beauty. This is a beautiful image of Lake Superior, and here another from Lake Michigan. So, as we think about this incredible resource, there are lots of questions that we could ask in terms of how we should govern it and who should govern it, who should have input into making those decisions. Is it a national resource? Is it a regional resource? Is it a state resource? And certainly over the years, there's been some aspects of all of the above in Great Lakes governance. But the key topic for today is whether and how to allow diversions of Great Lakes water outside the Great Lakes Basin, which, at least for now, is being handled as a regional question as part of the Great Lakes Compact. Certainly, the question of diversions is not a new one. There have been many diversions in and out of the Great Lakes over the past 200 years that have raised and lowered the level of water in the lakes by centimeters or inches. The best known diversion out and the largest is the Chicago diversion, as we'll talk about in more detail as we go through the presentation. But it's far from the only diversion out. This is the list. I took a screenshot of the WDNR's website for here in Wisconsin, the list of diversions. And you can see that I've highlighted the ones that are post-compact. So there's about a dozen that were pre-existing to the compact. And then the highlighted ones were all consequential in some way under the compact. New Berlin, for example, the first approved diversion under the compact to a straddling community, and I'll talk about what that term means. The city of Waukesha, the first and I believe only to a community in a straddling county, a much more difficult standard to overcome that showed really, I think, how difficult it's going to be to surmount the hurdles that the compact puts up for diversions to communities in a straddling county. But I think it's also worth taking a look at the history going back and how it led to what we have now in the Great Lakes Compact. And there are lots of proposals for diversions out of the Great Lakes on a major scale, dating back a long time. I'll just highlight a few of them. As I said, there are many others, and none of these, by the way, actually happened. First, in the late 1970s, there was a proposal to construct a coal slurry pipeline from Wyoming to Duluth in Minnesota, using Lake Superior water to slurry the coal or to suspend the coal. Many of you are familiar with the Ogallala Aquifer in the central United States. It's been depleted more than 100 feet, 150 feet in some areas from its original levels. And in the early 1980s, the Army Corps of Engineers studied the feasibility of using Great Lakes water to replenish the Ogallala Aquifer. They actually produced a report on it. This figure is from that report. And we still hear about this from time to time today, not so much in terms of using Great Lakes water to replenish the aquifer, but just to be piped directly to those states. So this is something that comes up from time to time. Then one of the major triggers to the enactment of the compact was in 1998 when there was a proposal to ship Lake Superior water to private customers in Asia, approved by Ontario. A permit was granted for this. And I'm not sure how it would have been done at scale. Would have been difficult, I think, to charter that many tankers to really make a dent in the Great Lakes, but it was something that got people thinking about the dangers of depletion and diverting too much water outside of the Great Lakes basin. So now we're fast forwarding to around the time the compact was being agreed to and enacted both in the states and approved by Congress and the president in the mid 2000s. Fall 2007, this was a couple of years after the compact had been signed, at least it's in its initial form. Bill Richardson, who was the governor of New Mexico at the time and a presidential candidate, suggested as part of his platform that the Midwestern states that were, quote unquote, awash in water should discuss a new water policy with the arid Western states. And even fast forwarding to the very recent past, this is a 2020 commentary or opinion piece that a University of Chicago professor wrote for the one of the newspapers in Chicago. How can we stop a rising Lake Michigan from damaging communities? Sell the excess water at a tidy profit. So the proposal here was that we could remove the danger of flooding and rising waters, erosion around the coasts of the Great Lakes by simply selling any of that excess water. Because, and if you see that towards the bottom of the screen, the author wrote, we have too much water here, but plenty of communities have too little water, listing some that have major droughts, and concluding by saying moving water from Lake Michigan to farmers and communities in these places would make everyone better off. It seems a little short-sighted in that the Great Lakes obviously rise and fall in different cycles over the years, but perhaps it could have been defined such that excess water would only be shipped at certain times of that cycle. I don't know. Certainly, it would have violated the Great Lakes Compact. And then even more recent than that, a couple of final citations for you here. This was a New York Times editorial from just last fall by a professor at Arizona State University, who I believe also had a career at NASA. Will we have to pump the Great Lakes to California to feed the nation? And even more recently than that, President Trump's conversations with Canadian officials, in which he expressed an interest in revisiting the Great Lakes agreements that govern Lake Superior, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Didn't list Lake Michigan, of course, because it's the only Great Lake that's completely within the United States, but you get the sense of things here that if we're willing to look at the Great Lakes agreements between the US and Canada, it would seem that the Great Lakes Compact would be part of that conversation or discussion. So all that led us to the Great Lakes Compact. That's our focus for today. Regional governance, of course, of the Great Lakes via the Compact. It was unveiled by the drafters in 2005, enacted into state law by the legislatures of the 8 Great Lakes states in 07 and 08, and approved by Congress and signed by the president in 2008. So it has almost unique status among American laws in that it's state law, it is federal law, it is a contract of sorts between the party states. So it has a lot of legitimacy behind it in those ways. Under the compact, the 8 Great Lakes states agreed to certain rules for managing Great Lakes water. And what everyone knows about the compact and thinks about the compact first is, of course, the prohibition on diversions of water outside the Great Lakes basin. But one of the points I want to make today is that there is a lot more in the compact than just that. There's the recognition of the compact status as a shared resource to be held in trust and managed in trust by the Great Lakes states, almost an interstate version of the public trust doctrine, for those of you who are familiar with that concept. Lots of principles related to water conservation and efficient use, the importance of sound science in the management of water and the management of the Great Lakes. The inclusion of groundwater in the definition of the waters covered by the compact is really innovative. It's something that we don't see in a lot of water compacts nationally and internationally. Certainly, the older ones don't include groundwater, and that's caused lots of difficulty for courts in interpreting the terms of those compacts. But the Great Lakes Compact is clear in that groundwater is included within its terms. And then, of course, our main subject for today, when and how to allow diversions outside the Great Lakes Basin. So before we get to that, I did just want to say a little bit more about the agreement in the compact to develop water conservation and efficiency programs and to study and report water usage, which has been another, I think, really great thing about the compact. We've generated a lot more data having to do with water usage when it comes to Great Lakes water, what the different things that it's used for, how much it's used, and the Wisconsin DNR has really done a great job in collecting that data and publishing periodic reports along those lines. But as to diversions, moving to that now, of course, as I mentioned already, the compact generally prohibits new or increased diversions of Great Lakes water outside the Great Lakes Basin, with very limited exceptions. One is for communities that straddle the basin boundary. These are communities that are partly within and partly outside the Great Lakes Basin. And it occurs to me now that I forgot to make one announcement at the top of the show today, and that is, if you do have questions or comments that you want to contribute to us, please put those in the chat and address them to Hillary, our program manager. She will collect them, and I do plan to stop a few minutes early to invite some discussion and questions. So for now, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and address them to Hillary. So thanks, and sorry that I forgot to mention that earlier. Okay, so straddling communities. These are communities that straddle the basin boundary line. New Berlin, I already mentioned, in Wisconsin, was the first such diversion approved under the compact. And these can be approved at the state level without regional consent from all of the Great Lakes governors, unless the diversion results in a consumptive use of 5 million gallons per day or more. The standards here are pretty high. The recipient has to show that the need for the diversion cannot be avoided through conservation and efficient use of their existing supplies, that there will be no significant adverse impacts to the waters of the basin. And of course, the water of the basin has to be returned after use if it's not consumed as part of the diversion. Even higher hurdles for communities in a straddling county. These are communities that are outside the Great Lakes Basin, but lie within a county that straddles the basin line. So Waukesha, again, is the example of this. And that was a multi-year, very expensive battle. And I know there was some concern over the precedent that would set, but it seems that the precedent set was that it's going to be really difficult under the Great Lakes Compact to get a diversion to a community in a straddling county. So these communities have to meet all those standards applicable to straddling communities that we already discussed, and also show that they have no reasonable water supply alternative. These proposals, again, it's a higher standard, have to be approved by all 8 Great Lakes governors. So I think I've seen that there are about 68 counties in the Great Lakes Basin that straddle the basin line. So there are a number of communities that could potentially apply for this exception. But to date, I believe Waukesha is the only one that has been approved under the compact. So straddling communities in straddling counties, and then removal in containers smaller than 5.7 gallons is also allowed under the compact. You can think here of bottled water or beer or canned vegetables and fruit. Those kinds of containers are generally exempt from the compact as well. All the states saw the impact that could have if that type of use was prohibited within the Great Lakes Basin economically, and so that's an exception as well under the compact. Okay, so all of that applies to the Great Lakes states except Illinois. By its express terms, the ban on diversions does not apply to the state of Illinois. Instead, diversions within Illinois are governed by a Supreme Court decision, Wisconsin versus Illinois, which I'll talk about shortly. But you can see that I've highlighted here in the sort of generic version of the compact the relevant provisions. Diversions within the state of Illinois are governed by the Supreme Court decree in Wisconsin versus Illinois. Diversions in Illinois can be allowed unless prohibited by the terms of that decree. The compact cannot prohibit or limit the state of Illinois from seeking additional basin water as allowed under that Supreme Court decree. And finally, if there were any doubt about the matter, it's removed. At the bottom, the state of Illinois is actually prohibited from using any term of this compact to seek new or increased diversions of basin water. So the reason for this was to protect the Chicago diversion, which was a pre-existing diversion, and I want to explore how it came to be and why we have it. But Illinois wouldn't have agreed to the compact without this provision because, of course, it had to preserve the Chicago diversion and not have that be subject to the compact. And there's another section of the compact that says if this is ever severed, from the compact, Illinois will consider itself no longer to be bound by the compact, or not that it will consider itself to be no longer bound. It will be no longer bound by the compact. Okay, so I'll get back to the Chicago diversion in just a moment, but kind of to sum up this conversation about diversions under the Great Lakes Compact, the Chicago megacity, and again, I'm using that as one of my themes for the presentation, has had more diversion hotspots than all other of the Great Lakes states and provinces combined. New Berlin, as I've mentioned, was the first approved diversion under the compact. Waukesha was the first diversion to a community in a straddling county. The Racine diversion, which we haven't talked about yet, was the first diversion that was administratively challenged in the courts of Wisconsin, the administrative law courts of Wisconsin. That one was primarily intended to serve the Foxconn development, which never really got off the ground. And the question there was that the compact says that diversions have to be for public water supply purposes. The question was whether the industrial use at Foxconn was for public water supply purposes. And the court, the administrative law court, held that it was, looking at the system as a whole. The Racine system as a whole and the Mount Pleasant system as a whole consisted of primarily residential customers, and so it approved that diversion. So those are all influential cases, and we could have a separate conversation about all of them and how we've gotten to this point. But focus today, of course, is on the Chicago diversion, which is the largest and most litigated diversion by far. So we're all familiar with the Chicago River today. It's an amenity, a recreational hotspot. We dye it green on St. Patrick's Day, right? And it supports a variety of restaurants and art exhibits and other attractions. But it wasn't always this way, this beautiful of a setting. As Chicago grew in the late 19th century, the river slowly became an open sewer as people dumped all sorts of different wastes into it. And of course, at that time, it fed directly into Lake Michigan, which was near the intake for the city's water supply. So the city tried several different things. It tried constructing a sewer system. That didn't work because the piping still ran to the river and discharged to the river, although it was one of the first modern sewer systems in the United States. Then it tried moving the intake further out into the lake, but under some conditions, particularly storm conditions, contaminated flow from the river still reached the intake. So how was it going to solve this problem of the intakes being befouled by the waste from the Chicago River? Well, it hit upon really a revolutionary solution, an engineering marvel. It reversed the flow direction of the Chicago River so that it carried the sewage away from the lake, constructing an artificial canal that connected it to the Des Plaines River, then to the Illinois River, and finally to the Mississippi River. So ultimately, that wastewater now, or that the river now flows into the Mississippi River watershed as opposed to the Great Lakes watershed. So I've got an image here of some of the blasting that took place. Here's another construction image of the canal connecting the Chicago River to the Mississippi River watershed. Here's a map to the extent that this makes it easier to visualize. You can see in the middle part of the map on the shoreline of Lake Michigan, the main stem of the Chicago River and how it used to flow. But the connection point was here, this artificial canal section that connected the southern branch of the Chicago River to the Des Plaines River and hence to the Mississippi River watershed. So the state of Missouri got extremely bothered and upset about this diversion sort of as it was happening and sued Illinois over the project in the United States Supreme Court. The way this works in our court system is that when two states are suing each other, generally they can go right to the Supreme Court. They don't have to go through the lower courts. The Supreme Court has what we call original jurisdiction over those kinds of cases. And the thinking there is that the states gave up some of their sovereignty when they joined the Union. And so they have the right to contest this as sort of mini sovereigns in the United States Supreme Court. And the allegations in the bill were pretty significant. The result of threatened discharge, Missouri alleged, would be to send 1,500 tons of poisonous filth daily into the Mississippi to deposit great quantities of the same upon the part of the bed of the Mississippi belonging to the plaintiff, that's Missouri again, and so to poison the water of that river upon which various of the plaintiffs' cities, towns, and inhabitants depended, as to make it unfit for drinking, agricultural, or manufacturing purposes. So, some pretty serious allegations. And again, this is in the 1906 timeframe, and the court ruled in favor of Illinois. So, I want to share a little bit about the reasoning. That's a picture of Justice Holmes. He's got a great mustache, if nothing else, but he's also one of the most respected justices in the history of the court. And so, a lot of the opinion is really, I think, relevant to us today. He writes, "It is a question of the first magnitude whether the destiny of the great rivers is to be the sewers of the cities along their banks or to be protected against everything which threatens their purity." He noted at that point that Missouri actually also permitted discharge of sewage into its own rivers and sort of was coming into the court with unclean hands, as it were, in asking Illinois to do something that it didn't require of its own municipalities. He also wrote, "There is nothing which can be detected by the unassisted senses, no visible increase of filth, no new smell. On the contrary, it is proved that the great volume of pure water from Lake Michigan mixed with the sewage at the start has improved the Illinois River in these respects to a noticeable extent." Right? Dilution, to become the rallying cry of lots of different folks in the century and a half since. Dilution is the solution to pollution. We know there are problems with that approach, but that's essentially the approach the court took in this case. The plaintiff's case depends upon an inference of the unseen, what we would call epidemiology, I think, uh, requiring sort of a study or proof of increased, say, waterborne diseases as a result of this discharge. And the court just didn't find that in the case. Another point that I wanted to raise that sort of proved prophetic, again, in terms of our discussion here today, some stress was laid on the proposition that Chicago is not on the natural watershed of the Mississippi because of a rise of a few feet between the Des Plaines and the Chicago rivers. We perceive no reason for distinction on this ground. Obviously, that's something that became heavily contested in the century and 20 years since then. But the court was aware that this project had created an artificial link between the Great Lakes watershed and the Mississippi River watershed, and simply didn't find it to be a reason for distinction in the case. And then finally, what the future may develop, of course, we cannot tell. But our conclusion upon the present evidence is that the case proved falls so far below the allegations of the bill that it is not brought within the principles heretofore established in the cause. In other words, the court should only intervene when the allegations are clearly proven. And Justice Holmes and the other members of the court simply did not find that Missouri had met its burden in proving any injury on the part of Illinois here, and so dismissed the case. I do want to put in a plug here for this book, Lakefront, which is really a tour de force of the establishment of the Chicago lakefront. It covers in detail the reversal of the Chicago River and a whole lot more that we're not going to talk about today. In full disclosure, one of the co-authors is the dean of the law school, Joe Kearney, but it's really a great book, and I recommend it to you if you have interest in this subject area. Okay, so Missouri versus Illinois was not the end of the litigation over the Chicago diversion, far from it. And I want to talk about a couple of the other cases that resulted from that. And again, this goes to how the Chicago diversion was legitimized in the law and why it is included in the direct terms of the Great Lakes Compact. So in 1929, 6 of the other 7 Great Lakes states sued Illinois. I believe the only one that did not join was Indiana. Seeking to enjoin or stop Illinois from withdrawing what was then 8,500 cubic feet per second from Lake Michigan at Chicago. And the reason was that the Chicago diversion, at least the allegation went, had lowered the levels of the Great Lakes by at least 6 inches at that point, causing property damage and other harm in those states, and that it had also never been authorized by Congress. So the court allowed the diversion to continue ultimately, but limited its amount. And the states kept going back to the Supreme Court over and over during the decades following. The most recent adjustment to the allowable amount was in 1967, when the court set the allowable amount of the Chicago diversion at 3,200 cubic feet per second, which, as you saw on that previous map showing the diversions, equates to 91 cubic meters per second, or alternatively, just over 2 billion gallons per day. And that's where the number sits today. And Chicago uses that diversion for a variety of purposes. Municipal water source, obviously, but also navigation in the Chicago River and a few other things as well. The last attempt to reopen that decree in Wisconsin versus Illinois came in 2010 when Michigan moved to reopen it on the grounds that it constituted a public nuisance by allowing the introduction of harmful aquatic invasive species into the Great Lakes. And this is what we most are concerned about today, or hear about most often when it comes to the Chicago diversion and this artificial link between the Great Lakes watershed and the Mississippi River watershed. These are a variety of Asian carp. You can see them jumping out of the water here. And the Army Corps of Engineers and the Great Lakes states have gone to great lengths to try to keep them out of the Great Lakes. They are voracious predators. The fear is that they would devastate the fishery and the ecosystem in the Great Lakes itself. In 2010, however, the court denied Michigan's request to reopen, and no requests have been made since then, at least in terms of the amount of the decree. So that brings us to Joliet, and one of the topics of the conversation for us today. Very scenic view of the city here, a population of approximately 150,000, which makes it the third largest city in the state of Illinois. This water source for Joliet, at least up to now, has been a deep groundwater aquifer, and in that way, it's actually similar to Waukesha, one of the other diversions that we discussed earlier in the presentation, in that its aquifer is running out. And in Waukesha, there was a water quality issue as well with the radium in the water. But at Joliet, it's a quantity issue. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about the geography and geology of Joliet. Joliet crosses two counties, Kendall County and Will County, and you can see on the blow-up map the sprawl of the city, and on the larger map, the inset shows exactly where this lies in relation to Chicago and to the Great Lakes. So Joliet thought that it had a stable water supply, as I understand it, to last 100 years or more, but those predictions were revised in the mid-2010s when scientists accelerated the date of the proposed aquifer depletion to 2030 or 2040. I've put on the screen here a picture or a graphic from a paper from the Illinois State Water Survey that was released around that same time, describing the groundwater depletion in the area. And you can see Kendall County and Will County on the map there, and moderate and high risks to the groundwater supply. And the withdrawals, you can see some significant withdrawals in the western part of Will County, in the area of Joliet and some other communities there as well. So the upshot of all this was that Joliet began to search for an alternative water source, evaluated many different options, and ultimately settled on pursuing where we are today, the purchase of Lake Michigan water from the city of Chicago. So I do want to highlight where Joliet is in terms of its watershed. On this larger map from the Illinois State Water Survey, the green and blue areas drain to the Mississippi River watershed, generally speaking. The brownish yellow watersheds at the bottom right of the map drain to the Ohio River, and the pink watershed is the Great Lakes watershed. And if you can't see the pink, you're not alone. It's, again, razor thin in this part of the world, right adjacent to the shore of Lake Michigan. So I'm going to blow this up on the next slide. Now you can see the pink, I think, a little bit better. That's the Lake Michigan watershed, and you can see how the green areas, the Des Plaines watershed, almost goes right up to the boundaries of Lake Michigan, and you can see Joliet at the bottom center of the map. So clearly, Joliet is outside the Great Lakes Basin. And because it's outside the Great Lakes Basin, the diversion would be prohibited under the Great Lakes Compact if it were subject to the compact. But it's not, for the reasons that we talked about. It is not governed by the compact, this agreement. Instead, it's subject to the Supreme Court's decree in Wisconsin versus Illinois that we talked about, which is the Chicago diversion. And so for that reason, the city of Joliet was able to reach agreement with the city of Chicago on this 100-year agreement to purchase Lake Michigan water from Chicago beginning in 2030. So this is a 100-year term to begin in 2030 again, with a 10-year automatic renewals after that. All that, of course, unless one of the parties withdraws first. The infrastructure cost, I've seen various numbers, anywhere between $1 to $2 billion, in some cases even a little bit higher than that, with construction to begin this year, and then an annual cost estimated at $30 million per year after that, to include Joliet and probably several nearby suburbs as well, which have collectively organized into the Grand Prairie Water Commission. The amount of the diversion will be, according to the agreement, as requested by Joliet, but not to exceed a certain maximum capacity, which is initially set at 105 million gallons per day. I've seen reported that the initial amount transferred will be 55 million gallons per day, so not close to the maximum allowable capacity under the agreement, but it's enough that the Grand Prairie Water Commission will immediately become Chicago's second largest water customer. As far as the quality, Chicago's famous for the good taste and good quality of its tap water. And so the agreement simply says that the quality has to be commensurate with the quality that's furnished to Chicago's existing customers that it already has. So here's a map of the infrastructure that I copied from the Grand Prairie Water Commission's website. You can see it's a significant infrastructure lift to construct all this pipeline and pumping from Chicago to the area where the Water Commission is, to include Joliet and the other members of the Grand Prairie Water Commission. I think part of this also illustrates another difficulty with some of these proposals to ship Great Lakes water to Phoenix or Kansas or Wyoming, and that is it's really expensive to move water. Water is not a light commodity, it's heavy. And so the pumping costs alone would in some ways be prohibitive from pumping it that far, at least as compared to other alternatives like desalination, or even better would be water reuse of one type or another. It's not easy to find the terms of the agreement online. I got this from the minutes of the City of Joliet's City Council's consideration of the agreement and got a copy of it there. It was not the final signed agreement, but I don't expect that it has changed too much since then. It's a very lengthy, complex, complicated legal document. Covers everything from financing to real estate to reporting to water quality to maintenance of the new facilities and infrastructure, measurement of the water, water rates, withdrawal from the agreement, transparency, all sorts of different things. So it runs well over 100 pages. My goal is not to go through this today, but just to give you a sense of the complexity of the agreement that goes into something like this. And obviously, this would be magnified tenfold if the goal was to supply water to somewhere outside the basin, which wouldn't be allowed anyway under the Great Lakes Compact. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, my intent here is not to provide a judgment on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I do recognize that there are strong feelings on both sides of the question. First, to talk about some of the arguments in favor of it. Obviously, the first one is that it solves Joliet's water supply problem. Chicago is providing a stable, clean, quality water supply to 250,000 people who need it, who are otherwise dependent on a failing underground aquifer. And when we think of all the water crises that we've had in this country over the past 10 years or so, beginning with Flint and running through to Newark and Jackson, Mississippi, and other places as well, we want to avoid that kind of hardship to the extent we can. It also, of course, would be a new revenue stream for the city of Chicago. It will, the Grand Prairie Water Commission would immediately become Chicago's second largest water customer, after, I believe, DuPage Water Commission. And it's relatively speaking, a fairly small percentage of Chicago's allocation under the Supreme Court case, the Wisconsin versus Illinois case. If my math is correct, I think it's about 5% of what that allocation is in total, and that's even under the maximum allowable delivery rate to Joliet, which we're not going to be close to at the very beginning. Chicago believes the deal won't affect its commitment to be a good steward of Great Lakes water. That's clear from its press releases and media surrounding the agreement. And one point that I want to be super clear about is that providing water to Joliet does not mean opening the door for Great Lakes water to be shipped to Phoenix or Los Angeles or Seattle or anywhere else outside the Great Lakes Basin. If you are not in a straddling county or a straddling community, you cannot get access to Great Lakes water, full stop, other than the Chicago diversion. And that, of course, is limited in scope. It is a large quantity of water in isolation, but it's not significant in terms of the overall volume of the Great Lakes. So I don't think that this opens the door standing alone for the diversion of Great Lakes water to the West Coast or the Sun Belt states. For that to happen, we would need a complete failure of the Great Lakes Compact. And I don't rule that out at some point in the future that the Great Lakes Compact could be challenged in court or fail for some other reason. But I don't see that happening as a result of this individual sale to Joliet. I do want to recognize a couple of other things as well. In its comprehensive plan, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, actually projected that overall water use in northeastern Illinois is likely to stay relatively stable in the coming decades. And that's true even if population grows, because the use per person is anticipated to decline due to conservation measures and water efficiency efforts that are likely to increase. And the overall trend, according to CMAP, was toward reduced demand for Lake Michigan water as a result of the Chicago diversion. So I want to put up a couple of graphics from the report that are really helpful and illustrate this. Here's the first one showing pretty stable water demand regionally in the northeastern Wisconsin region. A slight increase going to 2050, but again, not super significant when we look at that in 2000. It was actually well over 1,250 million gallons per day. We're not going to be approaching that number even by 2050, according to the projections in the report. And then even more, I think, interesting is this graph here. I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at it. This shows the demand from various different water sources in northeastern Illinois. And what it shows is that demand is going to be increasing on a few different sources, aquifers, whether the shallow aquifer or the sandstone aquifer. But it's actually projecting a decrease in the demand from Lake Michigan as a result of the Chicago diversion, down 10% by 2050. And even if we were to adjust that to add, say, 50 million gallons per day for the Joliet diversion, we still would see a overall decrease, again, if this projection holds true, in terms of the amount of water withdrawn from Lake Michigan or demanded from Lake Michigan as a result of the diversion. On the other hand, I'm aware that the deal does have its critics. This is a headline from the Cleveland Plain Dealer that was written shortly after the deal was announced, calling it a stark warning for the Great Lakes Compact. And according to some voices, Chicago is profiting from its ecologically problematic decision to reverse the flow of the river more than a century ago. It's created this problem with invasive species coming into the Great Lakes, the argument goes, and now Chicago is going to sell that water to other communities as a result of the same effort. The other major argument against it, as far as I can tell, is that water demand will actually continue to increase, maybe not just in Joliet or not just in northeastern Illinois, but everywhere. And so the pressure on diversions or the demand for diversions is likely to increase. So I want to close by leaving you with several questions about the Great Lakes Compact going forward into the future, both as a result of the conversation that we've had today and some other things as well. One is, when it comes to diversions, will pressure arise from other areas, not Joliet or not even Illinois specifically, but from other areas within the other 7 Great Lakes states, but outside the Great Lakes Basin? And let me take my own state of Wisconsin as an example. Let's say there were a water crisis in Madison, which lies outside the basin. It's not a straddling community, and it's not in a straddling county either. Dane County, where Madison sits, is not a straddling county for purposes of the Great Lakes Compact. And so What would happen if Madison were in the middle of a water crisis, the capital of Wisconsin, and a demand were brought to the Great Lakes, rather to the governor of Wisconsin to give us Great Lakes water to prevent some suffering or um, other effects that might result from a shortage of water within the state but outside the Great Lakes Basin. I feel that would be a really tough moment for a Great Lakes governor to uphold the compact and say no, we're not going to provide that water even within our state. So that's one question. Another is whether the Great Lakes should be viewed as a regional resource or a national resource. Um, so I've hinted at this question already earlier in the presentation. And the question here, of course, is whether the resource should be maintained in the region or used for the benefit of the whole country. I've often heard it said that water is the new oil, right? I'm sure many of us have heard that saying. Well, it would sort of be like saying, we're going to harvest some oil in Texas, but it could only remain within Texas. We're not going to ship it out. And there are, of course, problems with that analogy, but um, that's the sort of question that we're going to be faced with, I think, whether the resource should be used nationally or just regionally. Similarly, is any disruption of the natural state of things to be viewed as a negative? Landfilling of wetlands, for example, or even lakes, as has happened historically, is that automatically a bad thing just because it's a disruption of the natural order of things? Should we disfavor it for that reason alone? I think you could say the same thing about diversion of Great Lakes water outside the Great Lakes Basin. Another question, is it good policy to use water for economic development purposes, such as attracting climate migration from other parts of the United States or even internationally? Should we use our water as a tool for economic development and put it up for sale at reduced rates or even provide it free, as some have proposed, to industry or other residents who would come to locate here and grow the tax base? Should we try to bring those companies here, or uh, another point of view would be, should we agree to send water there? As the University of Chicago professor asked, should we sell it to other communities where water is in demand? And then finally, will President Trump act on his musings related to re-examining water compacts between the United States and Canada? It sounds like his latest meeting with the Canadian premier was much more conciliatory, but we're not sure exactly where that's going to go in terms of re-examining those water agreements between the U.S. and Canada. So I've gone for almost 50 minutes now. I do want to open it up to some questions and discussion, but I also wanted to provide my contact information here, and I'll leave this up on the screen for a few minutes. If you care to reach out to me for whatever reason to provide a comment or open a discussion, I'm always very happy to entertain those requests. So I'll leave it there. And Hillary, I'll ask if there are any questions or comments in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor Striffling. There are a few, so I hope you'll bear with me as I try and scroll down and read these. The first one, and it's sort of related to what you just last talked about, is the Great Lakes Compact also an international treaty approved by the US Senate and by Canada?
Good question. So there are actually two agreements, the Great Lakes Compact and the Great Lakes Agreement. And the reason for that is that under the Constitution, individual US states cannot enter binding agreements with foreign powers. Only the Congress can do that. And so what that means on a practical note is that the Canadian Great Lakes provinces are involved in the regional review process. They have a voice on the regional review body, but they do not have a vote. They don't have a binding vote to disapprove, say, a community in a straddling county from getting water. And that's, again, sort of a constitutional issue that the individual states or groups of states cannot agree to treaties with foreign entities. So there are two agreements there, the Great Lakes Compact and the Great Lakes Agreement, with the compact being the binding one that I've mostly been talking about, and the agreement being non-binding.
Thank you. This question is related to terminology used in the presentation. You have called it the Chicago diversion, but should it be called the State of Illinois diversion? Because there are many community water systems that hold permits to use Lake Michigan water for drinking access in northeastern Illinois. And Chicago is not the only city that directly diverts water out of Lake Michigan. So can you talk a little bit about that difference in terminology?
Right, it's a good point again, because we often call it the Chicago diversion for shorthand because it was the city of Chicago that originally constructed the diversion and reversed the flow of the Chicago River. But it's absolutely true to say that the compact does not refer to it as the Chicago diversion, refers to it as the Illinois diversion, and puts things in terms of the state of Illinois generally. So I'll take that as a friendly amendment. That's well taken, and all of what we're referring to technically does refer to the whole state of Illinois and the diversion through Chicago, as opposed to maybe just calling it the Chicago diversion. So thanks for that.
Perfect. All right, apologies. Let me scroll down a little more. Both stormwater capture and groundwater recharge systems are mature technologies. Why is there no mention of this approach to aquifer management?
Yeah, so my understanding is that Joliet did look at those types of technologies in terms of its review of various alternatives to Lake Michigan water, and came up with the conclusion that it wouldn't work in terms of the amount of water that was necessary. Certainly, I haven't studied the question enough to be able to comment on it in terms of whether that was an accurate conclusion or not. But I do agree that those are both possible methodologies for managing water supply. Just didn't seem to work in this case.
What role do you think increased data centers for AI could impact water usage in the diversion project?
Yeah, another good question. So AI data centers are huge water users. There's one located in one of the communities that's going to be part of the, or maybe plant under discussion for location in one of the communities that's going to be part of the Grand Prairie Water Commission. I've heard both that the infrastructure is not necessarily sized to provide water to those levels of industries, but also that it could use as much as 3 million gallons per day by some projections. So that's definitely an issue to watch, not just here, but all over the country, frankly, in terms of the level of water use that's required to sustain AI and sustain data centers. So it's a really good thing to watch.
Who benefits from Chicago not returning the water to Lake Michigan? Who benefits from the water flowing down the Mississippi? Does someone or a municipality downstream benefit?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of benefit. I guess when the canal was constructed, the city of Chicago was definitely benefiting in terms of cleaning up the water around its intake. Um, and now all of the communities that rely on that for their water supply certainly benefit from that as well. We could make other arguments about whether downstream communities benefit from that as well. I will say that when Wisconsin sued Illinois in 1929, Missouri intervened on behalf of Illinois. So in the course of those intervening 2 decades between when Missouri had sued Illinois, its opinion on the diversion had changed. So certainly, there's an argument to be made that all of the downstream communities benefit from having that diversion in place. But I think the most immediate beneficiaries, of course, are the city of Chicago and its surrounding communities.
Can you speak to, oh, sorry, it just refreshed and now I lost the question. 1 second, please. Does Juliet have to return water to Lake Michigan in the same way that the city of Waukesha does?
My understanding is not that, because the city is so far outside the Great Lakes watershed, that it will discharge water to the Mississippi, just like the rest of the Chicago diversion goes to the Mississippi. Somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of the project.
And one more, can you speak to what's required of Joliet related to water conservation and efficiency for this diversion?
I cannot. I'm not sure exactly what is in the agreement as far as that goes. The agreement, I believe, mostly speaks to the amount of water that Chicago will deliver to Joliet. It's again, it's not subject to the compact, so it's not subject to the same water conservation or efficiency requirements that the compact would impose on a community in a straddling county or a straddling community that was seeking a diversion. So the Chicago may have put some requirements in place, but it wouldn't be the ones that are same ones that are required under the compact.
Perfect. One more, and Professor Striffling, you talked about this a little bit, but given the water safety issues in rural areas, especially in rural Wisconsin and those sorts of things, would you anticipate the Great Lakes Compact being amended? Or should we add that to the list of questions that you had in terms of potential
Yeah,
future conversations?
I mean, I think that's a future area of stress for the compact, certainly. I don't know whether I'd predict that it will be amended or challenged or something else. But I think that's one of those questions to watch or to consider as we go forward, given the depletion of groundwater aquifers all over the country and including in many of the Great Lakes states.
Perfect. Do you have time for one more?
Sure, let's do one more.
Excellent. The title of the talk is Selling Water to Joliet. My question is about the wording. Is it really selling access versus selling water? And how important is it to shape the perception that there is not an owner of the water?
Very interesting question, almost a philosophical question in some ways. Yeah, I mean, well, I think the easiest way to answer it for me is to say that Chicago has the legal right to have this much water diverted under the U.S. Supreme Court's consent decree in Wisconsin versus Illinois. And Chicago can really do whatever it wants with that water, including providing it to the surrounding communities. And that's what it's choosing to do um, in this case with Joliet. And you could look at that as a sale of a commodity in some ways, but I know there's a lot of resistance to commoditizing water and other natural resources. Um, so again, I think it's as much a philosophical question as anything else, but legally, Chicago has the right to, yeah, sell this water to the surrounding communities.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming, everyone. I do appreciate you being here. And again, thank you to Current for being affiliated with this event. We're happy to do a Chicago Water Week event this year and hopefully for many years into the future. So I hope you have a great weekend and feel free to reach out to me at this email address if you have any other questions or comments. So thanks and have a good day.